Now, I love having a huge screen when gaming. Being able to annihilate enemies in 100 inches in glorious 4K. Oof. But for a long time, gaming and projectors, they just weren't a very good mix. Except until recently, where the technology has advanced enough that we have this. An extremely bright, colour accurate and incredibly responsive gaming projector. This is the BenQ X3100i. Now, I know what you're thinking. BenQ back at it again with the uncatchy names. X3100i doesn't quite roll off the tongue. That being said, I think I can forgive them because this projector is phenomenal. So I want to thank BenQ for sending this over so I could do them an impartial review. This is the newest model in their X gaming series, and it's an upgrade over the very similar but somehow quite different X3000i. Now I'll get into what is new later in the video. But first of all, let's just look at what comes in the box. So in the box we get all of the power cables, the new QS02 dongle, the remote, some documentation and mounting options, and obviously the projector itself. The projector is a bit of a big boy. The whole unit weighs in just under 7 kilos or about 15 pounds. Honestly, I'm a huge fan of the design. I think it looks really clean and modern. I think it will look good in any setup. Now on the side we have some manual lens controls. There's a manual focus and a manual optical zoom. Now if you have it in a setup where it's going to sort of stay in the same place, in a sort of a one and done situation, then that's not going to be too faffy. But if you're getting it out every time, just bear in mind there is no autofocus on this thing. Now the optical zoom works fantastically because it means when you're setting this up, you can be quite flexible with how far you are away from the screen, and you can sort of change the screen size, and it's not tied to exactly how far away from the screen you are. And not only that, because it's optical zoom and not digital zoom, it means you're not going to be sacrificing any sort of picture quality or latency. There are adjustable legs on the bottom, additional legs that you can add to the top of the projector and have it turn the other way if you like. And there's also a lens shift dial on the top of the projector, which means you can sort of adjust the angle without having to do any adjustments to any of the legs. It means you can quite easily and flexibly adjust that just depending on your screen height, and you don't have to be really sort of precise with the exact physical position of the projector. Now at the back we get two HDMI 2.0 ports, one of those being an enhanced audio return channel or EARC. And this means you can get this set up really well with your sound system and have proper Dolby 7.1 surround sound audio with this thing. And then there is also a hidden HDMI that we'll get onto in a second. We have a trigger port for being able to remotely control a motorized screen, so that if you power on the projector, it will also power on that motorized screen and make sure that your screen comes up at the same time. Really cool. We have a USB port and an optical out. There's a VGA for you classic PowerPoint presenters out there, and a basic 3.5 audio jack too. And like in the previous model, if you unscrew the two screws at the top, you actually get access to a little hidden HDMI cable, and that is for the included dongle. That plugs in there along with the little power cable. And this QS02 stick, that runs Android TV 11 and brings you all of the smart features that aren't actually built in to the projector itself. Now, despite it being a little bit of a faff when you first set it up, it is one and done. So unless you're going to upgrade this thing down the line, you're going to do it, you're going to forget about it, and you'll probably never do it again. Now also at the back you may notice we have some speakers. We'll get onto that in a second. So when you're setting this up, you have a pretty large array of different options to be able to get this set up perfectly for you. I would always recommend doing as much manually with the physical position of the projector before you do any sort of keystoning or stuff like that, just because if you can get this spot on physically, it's not going to affect your picture quality or your latency down the line if you decide to change things like keystone. So I'd put the projector where you want it, play with the zoom and the lens shift, and get the screen sort of exactly where you want it. And if you then need to do some keystoning and some digital adjustments, that should hopefully be the last thing that you need to do. Now the keystoning does work really well, and you've got tons of options of rotating and sort of getting to any angle if you need to, but this is a gaming projector, and if you want the best gaming performance, just leave it. Now the projector will be able to create an image of about 60 inches from as little as 5 feet, and that will go up to a whopping 200 inches at a minimum of about 16.7 feet away. Now those distances can increase if you decide to use the optical zoom on the projector or not. In terms of the sort of focus ability of this, that's the sort of recommended range. You could go higher or lower, but you're going to start losing some detail. Now there is a brief Android TV setup once you get onto the dongle. That's fairly simple. I'm not going to run you through that because it's just sort of your standard TV setup that you would normally do. Adding it selecting your apps and logging into accounts and all that jazz. Now you can do that. You don't actually technically have to do that with the projector. You could just plug in a console and get gaming straight away and not worry about the stick at all if you wanted to. But now, before we go into the plethora of different gaming features that this projector has, let's have a quick talk about that little QSO2 dongle. So this is a new dongle that is an upgrade from the one on some of BenQ's older projectors, including the one that is in the X3000i. So the QSO2 is still Android TV, it's Android TV 11, but it does give features like native Netflix support, which the old stick just didn't. And in fact, most projectors, weirdly, I don't understand what the reason is, but most projectors, you can't get Netflix directly on them. You have to go through something like a PlayStation or something like that to actually get Netflix on this thing. However, on this one, you can just do it straight from the projector. Mwah! Thank you. Now this stick is an upgrade in the sense that it supports Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.0. It can do sort of casting options like Chromecast or Apple AirPlay. Most streaming apps can be downloaded from the Google Play Store, but weirdly here in the UK, I can't get BBC iPlayer or ITV to work, so I am having to use those through my game console that's attached to this thing. In terms of speed, the dongle's fine at opening apps. It's not rapid, but it's not massively, it's not like a massive long wait between loading the app and watching something. But the actual navigation is a little bit slow. I wish it was just a little bit snappier. I'm pressing buttons on the controllers and I feel like it's taking quite a while, especially if you're doing something like typing. It feels like you're sort of having to stop and let the projector catch up with you, which is a bit of a shame. Now the remote is new. It's a rounder design, but functionally very similar to the X3000i's. You can control both the projector and the dongle through this remote, and there are shortcuts for different areas of settings. So for the dongle settings or projector settings are two separate things. But most importantly, the thing I love about this more than anything is the fact that the controller's backlit. Now, if you're using a projector, normally you're going to be using it in as dark a room as possible to get the best picture. And if you're going to be doing that, having a remote with no backlight means that you're just going to struggle to actually see what you're pressing. Now, having it backlit is just a bit of attention to detail, which I think BenQ have done very, very well to make this just that little bit better. Now, in terms of the actual sort of ergonomics of this thing, I think the buttons, and they're a little bit spongy, and that mixed with the sort of slow typing makes it a bit of a laborious process when you're typing in and using the remote. And there aren't any app shortcuts on this thing, so you can't just press a Netflix app and just go fire straight into Netflix, which is a bit of a shame. Now let's talk about the picture quality, because when I first opened and switched this thing on and started watching movies and playing games, I was absolutely blown away. Firstly, this thing is very bright compared to similar projectors of its size. It is phenomenally bright. It's got 3,300 ANSI lumens, which is brighter than the X3000i, and it was so noticeable. This is because the projector uses a full LED system, which allows it to become a lot brighter than other projectors. It also gives you much more saturated colors, so if you need to get these really bright, popping, vivid colors, this can do it. And not only were the colors really nice and vivid and saturated, but they weren't done too far. It was really accurate. The color accuracy of this thing straight out of the box is really good. Now you can actually go into some serious settings and make this thing, tune it and calibrate it to be even more accurate if you wanted to, but out of the box, honestly, personally for me, I was really happy with it just as it is, and I think for most people, they're not even going to need to touch it. They're not going to need to correct anything because the color accuracy is spot on. Now, details on projectors normally do depend on lighting. That's a big factor. So the lighting in your room, you're going to need to have a very dark room to get a lot of detail in the dark areas on your screen. But once you've done that, some projectors still struggle, and they actually, instead of it coming out black, it comes out a sort of grey colour. Now that's the same with all projectors, it's the same with this one too, but it's not a light grey that's being projected onto the screen. It's a really dark colour, and you get a lot of dark details, especially considering this is supports HLG, HDR10, HDR10 Plus. It covers a massive array of the Rec 709 colour spectrum for SDR content. Also does a really good job of DCI-P3 and Rec 2020, so this thing is going to be looking fantastic in both SDR and HDR content. Now, what you see on your screen is going to obviously vary massively from what I'm seeing in person, because it's going through a camera and being processed and compressed by YouTube, but I can assure you, in person, the shadow detail is very, very good. Now, it looks okay, but how does it sound? Now, classically, projector speakers were the worst speakers you could possibly get. In recent times, these speakers have been getting better and better, and this one is an example of a better speaker. It's not the best speaker I've seen from a Projector, but it's pretty good. It has two 5-watt speakers inside it, which can provide a fairly clear sound, and actually surprisingly does get quite loud. But there's only so much you can get from that. There's not going to be deep bass because there's no subwoofer. There's not going to be like a really clear, well-rounded sound coming from this thing. So it's pretty good for what it is. But if you're going to be really getting into and wanting the most immersive experiences in your movies and your games, then you're going to be wanting to connect this to an external sound source like a soundbar, surround sound system. And luckily this has a lot of flexibility with that. You've got a very simple version of doing just an audio jack from the 3.5 audio out port. You can do optical audio. It's also got an HDMI eARC port, which means this thing supports Dolby Vision, and you can get up to 7.1 surround sound through this thing just by plugging into that and getting that connected to your sound system if you have that sound system in place. Now, that would do you for the sort of premium sound if you really want it. In terms of just what you get out of the box, it's fine for casual use. If you're watching a movie, I've watched movies just using the speaker on there, and I had a pretty good time. It wasn't the best sound in the world, but it was plenty good enough. I could hear voices clearly, I could see what was happening, and I knew what was going on, so it wasn't too bad. Now I can see the X3100i being used really well in sort of 3 scenarios. As this is a gaming projector, the first one is gaming. Now the first thing to really focus on is the resolution and the frame rate. The HDMI ports are just 2.0 ports, and this is 4K pixel shifting. That means it's not technically native 4K, so it's not the best 4K signal, but it does a pretty good job of making a really good, sharp 4K image. But because of those limitations, you're not going to be getting 4K at 120 FPS. However, the projector will do 4K at 60 FPS, and it'll also do 1080p at up to 240 FPS, which is mental, and the latency is pretty mental too. In the past, projectors have had terrible latency, and what I mean by that is with the input lag is that when you do something on your remote, by the time you actually see it, there's a bit of a delay. So on classically, for example, laser projectors, you're looking at sort of 60 to 100 millisecond delay when you do something, and that is actually very noticeable. It means when you're playing first-person shooters and games that require some reaction time, that everything just feels difficult and sluggish, and it feels like you just can't aim properly. It also means that your performance in these games is obviously pretty poor. Now, because the input lag on this is so good, it just feels amazing. In 4K 60, the latency is 16 milliseconds, which is better than most TVs. 1080p 120 is 8 milliseconds, and 1080p at 240 is 4 milliseconds, which is better than OLED TVs. Honestly, this is ridiculous. Essentially, what this means is that your gameplay is going to feel buttery smooth, really satisfying to play games. Everything's going to feel like it's just tuned up and tightened to perfection. And in each of the games I've played on this, that has been in my experience the entire time. They look fantastic. Most of the time I just play in 4K 60 FPS because I feel like that is good enough personally for me. But for example, when I was playing God of War, I was playing a lot, considering I hadn't played the game in months. I was playing really well, and I think a lot of that is down to the fact that the input lag and stuff like that, it just felt so responsive and so satisfying to me that it just pushed me to be able to play at my best. Now, there's also different sound modes depending on what game you're playing, so the projector can actually, if it's processing your audio for you through the eARC connection, then it's going to actually put out different sound profiles depending on exactly which mode you select. There's quite a few different ones. So for example, you're going to get a nice deep bass in role-playing games, atmosphere building. In races, it can highlight engine noise and road noise. It can also highlight footsteps and sort of the darker noises that you get in FPSs to give you that tactical edge. And if while you're playing a console you save a preset and then you connect a different console, it'll actually remember per console what setting you have for it, so that if you're playing FPS games on your Xbox but then you're loading up your Nintendo Switch, it's going to go back to your RPG. Then you go back to the Xbox, it's going to bring back your FPS audio you had selected. Now there's also FPS crosshairs that you can add on, so if you want to have a precise crosshair or have a custom crosshair at a particular point on your screen, you can enable that, and then you get your own crosshairs on the screen permanently. So if you're hip firing, for example, you still get a good idea of where the center of your shot should be. Now there is also a settings exchange, so if you download this app on your PC and connect it to your projector via a USB cable, you can actually upload settings to the projector, per game. So there might be a particular game that you really play quite a lot. You can go and put the profile for that game directly onto your projector. Then you get the best possible picture and sound for that particular game. It's pretty cool. Now the next use case would be movies and TV. Like I said, this thing is HDR capable. So if you're watching HDR movies and stuff, and with the immense brightness that this projector has, you're going to have a fantastic experience watching HDR movies. SDR color accuracy is also very, very good. So you're going to have a really good time with that. Honestly, I mean, they label this thing as a gaming projector, and that's because it can also be a gaming projector, but this thing is one of the best movie projectors that I've actually watched. One issue that some people potentially might have is because this is a VLG type projector, that full LED technology, is that you can get the sort of rainbow effects if you're susceptible to that. I've never noticed it on this projector. I'm just fully aware that some people might notice it. It's never been an issue for me. Might be an issue for you, I don't know. And the third use case for this is that you could use this as like a normal presenting projector. So you can plug a laptop in. You can even plug in via the VGA port on the back. So if you are a bit old-fashioned, you want to do that, you got that too. But the way personally I would like to do that is I'd just use the AirPlay app. So you can Chromecast this, but there's also an app for AirPlaying, and you can access that through an app on your dashboard. If you AirPlay to this, it's just like AirPlay to anything. There's a very, very slight delay, but that's phenomenal for me. AirPlaying to an Android TV device, who would have thought we would get to this stage in life? It's amazing. So honestly, my experience with this projector has been really positive. There's not really a huge amount of things. I would say the biggest thing that annoys me is the operating system and how sort of slow it is to type on it, and that's a pretty good problem to be your worst problem. I'm massively impressed with the BenQ X3100i. I also hate the name. It's just a bit too hard to say, so I keep saying the projector instead of what it actually is called. Now, the prices of these things always change, so I'll stick a link in the description so you can see what the live price is as of today. Honestly, this projector is just phenomenal. I know Artings have rated it as their projector of the summer 2024. It's incredibly versatile. It's fantastic in terms of picture quality, color accuracy, brightness, gaming features. Honestly, there's so many things going for this projector, and honestly, if you're in the market for one, I can't think of much that I would pick potentially over this, but it would be interesting to hear what your thoughts are. Guys, let me know in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one. Woo!